you might want to look at as well. But I'm talking about significant situations where there are huge risk factors in their immediate families, y'all. And they just get put down to different events. I'm not going after motorcycle clubs. I'm talking about family violence here, okay, mostly. Or business violence, but not related to clubs and gangs and things. Okay. The next deaths are helicopter deaths. People that die in helicopter accidents. Some very significant people, perhaps, but also otherwise. And remember, there are deaths like this, okay? Especially in the military, especially in wartime, peacetime news. There's a lot of money in news. Or any kind of wealthy type situation, which is usually what you find with these things. Okay, so helicopter deaths. Not everybody on that helicopter might have been alive at the time of the accident. A lot of people could have been, and also not everybody that's supposed to have been on board might have been on board at the accident time either. So you should check for these for sure. But also, especially when there's survivors in helicopter accidents are a little bit suspect sometimes. Were they really on that helicopter? Did they die from some other injuries? Do they have risk factors for violence in their lives, y'all? Was there only one survivor? Was he really on that helicopter? Was there some reason for this to happen? Is this actually murder and not an accident? Were they added? Okay, not for everything that happens, but just for significant things. Or was it one of these things? Another one is skydiving. Now, there's a certain amount of risk, and I understand assumed risk, right? So you assume that when you do these things, there's a chance that you could perish, right? You understand that. And so sometimes it's easier to not investigate them and just put them down to that. Because sort of going with dangerous people is contained in that risk. So skydiving and our competent skydivers who pass away may have also unalived themselves because they know what they're doing. So if there's a problem with their parachute, you have to ask what the problem is. Now, that doesn't mean I want to open up a bunch of grief for families or a bunch of problems with investigations. So I'm just saying, take this with a grain of salt. This is not a professional opinion of any kind. I'm just trying to get you to see that domestic violence can be covered up by these things, where they go off of something that could be malfeasance, but it could also be suicide. And so you should be them unaliving themselves, I guess I should say. And so you should be careful also. So skydiving. You always should ask yourself, because when you find someone that's injured somewhere in the middle of some place with stuff, hiking gear, climbing gear, skydiving gear, whatever, you really need to ask yourself these questions. Because people pretend well. And people that want to get away with things pretend better than anybody I've ever seen do anything in my life. I mean, the craziest people, like some frumpy housewife, in the middle of nowhere, can cause obscene amounts of carnage, and people don't really ever think about it, which is sad. And it also happens a lot in Hollywood as well, although a lot of that is this. But we'll get to those too. Transportation deaths. This is a big one. Car accidents. A lot of people that die in car accidents. Now, you can't hide a dead body. Like there's different things that go on with people when they die that I'm not going to get into here, that mean that to a certain extent, this has to happen fairly quickly. Okay. So I'm not talking about someone's kept in a freezer for a year, although that could be a skydiving death. You never know. They could just be put out in a field thaw or something. But this is an accident where it happens fairly quickly after the violent death. Okay. So car accidents. Someone could put someone in a car and put a brick on the accelerator. They could do any number of things with a wrecked car and put the person in it. They can do lots of stuff. They could beat the life, unfortunately, out of a person and then put them in a car and have an accident and say they were unrestrained. And this happens more than you would think, especially with children, especially with women, passengers, whoever's likely to be a passenger in a car. And so it's important to ask the questions, to recreate things, to ask yourself if it's likely, and look for those dangerous people in the background. Because some people only do things once and get away with them. Some people do them over and over again. You don't really know in these kinds of situations who's going to end up being someone that pops back up again over and over and over again at the time. But I always think of those girls in the killing fields of Houston, looking up at the sky, life draining out of them. And they have a story. And we don't know what their story was, but they do. And they just don't have any way to tell us what that is. So